Hi everyone, I hope you're well. It's been another week where my plans have been disrupted because of COVID-19. And with the election being postponed until October, I guess as a nation our plans have been disrupted. The verses that we read last week have turned out to be really relevant. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. And while we can make plans, we need to acknowledge that ultimately much of what happens to us is out of our control. Today we're looking at James 5, verses 1 to 6. So if you want to pause the video and read those verses, then do that now. The theme that I get from these verses is injustice. When I first looked at this, I thought, this doesn't apply to me. The title of the paragraph is Warning to Rich Oppressors. I don't see myself as a rich oppressor. And it seems that James is talking to people outside of the church in this part of the book. But then I read back to a verse in chapter 4, verse 17, the verse just before these verses, which says, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin for them. I've certainly been guilty of that one. And I'm aware that compared to so many people in the world, I am rich. So the question I've been asking myself is, what is my responsibility when it comes to injustice in the world? From these verses, it seems obvious that God cares a lot about justice. Verse 4 says, the wages you failed to pay your workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. And in the next sentence, the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. So God sees injustice and he is firmly on the side of the oppressed. When I've thought about how to respond to the injustice that I've seen in the world, it's been really helpful for me to remember that justice is God's idea, not mine. I respond to his call for justice. So my desire to see justice comes from him. When I went to university, I studied history and sociology, and my faith was challenged because I began to ask questions about how God could allow so much suffering and injustice in the world. But it was the things that I thought were unjust in my own life that really made me question God. I think if everything was okay in my life, I would have been happy to let others sort out their own problems. But as I've grown in my faith and learned more about the world, it's been God that has reminded me that it's not all about me, that his goal is freedom for the world, not just my personal happiness. But I've found that my desire for justice can actually lead me away from relationship with God and others. There was a time in my life where my passion for justice meant that I didn't go to church because I thought they weren't doing enough. And I was also frustrated with God for the same reason. I thought he wasn't doing enough. And I've seen a lot of other friends go down that path too. But God gently reminded me that he didn't ask me to single-handedly save the world. He was already doing that. He reminded me that the church is still his plan to fight injustice in the world. And that it's through listening to him and doing what he says that I can be part of that. It's easy these days to talk a lot about justice without really getting anywhere. We live in a time where injustice is just so visible. I barely go through a day without being outraged at something I read online or saw on the news. I'm able to access so much information through the internet that I hear about so many things that I just can't do a lot about. It just overwhelms me sometimes. So I'm making a real effort to listen to the leading of the Holy Spirit. I think of the verses we read earlier in James 2:15 to 17. which say, suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. I want to do more than just rage against injustice online. I want to see real change. So I'm trying to limit the amount of time that I spend getting outraged by injustice overseas, while at the same time responding by giving financially or in prayer to the things that really touch my heart. I'm also trying to spend time getting to know people in my church community, because I believe that God's plan for transforming the world is personal. He is transforming the world by changing our hearts so that we actually love our neighbor as ourselves. As a Christian, I believe I must stand up for what I believe in and fight for justice. And my motivation for doing that must be a love for others that comes from a deep relationship with Christ. Some people think that following Christ is all about personal morality, and others think it's about fighting for justice in society. I think it includes both. 1 Corinthians 13:3 says, if I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, I do not have love, I gain nothing. This isn't saying don't fight for justice, just love people. What it's saying is love people, and out of that love, fight for justice. I'm convinced that love has to be at the center of all I do, and God is the source of that love. So my goal is simply to know Him and go where He leads. If that's your goal too, then I challenge you to read the next verses in James every day for the next week and ask yourself these questions. What's the truth in these verses? Am I living by this truth? What would my life and the lives of those around me look like if I always lived by this truth? And what do I need to do? The verses we'll be reading this week are James 5:7-12. They say, be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no, otherwise you will be condemned.